She almost kept riding. The desert heat had turned the trail to waves of shimmering air. And Eleanor Braddock had one thought on her mind: get home before the eggs spoiled. Her mare was tired, the saddlebags heavy with flour salt, and the quiet silence of another solitary day. She wasn't looking for anything or anyone, but then she saw it. A wagon sitting dead still in the middle of the trail. No horses, no driver. Just canvas pulled tight over the frame like a coffin under the sun. She might have passed it by. Plenty of folks abandon things out here, furniture wagons, even lives. But something stopped her. A sound. At first it was so faint she thought it was the wind. Then she heard it again. A cry, small, muffled, human. Eleanor froze. The cry came again, like a bird trapped in glass, fragile, desperate. She swung off her horse before her mind could catch up with her body. Her boots hit the dust. She walked toward the wagon, every step heavier than the last. The closer she got, the worse it felt. No breeze, no shade. Just that heavy stillness and the stench of something wrong. Then she saw the chains. Heavy iron links wrapped around the back gate, locked tight. She reached for them, burned her hand. The metal was blistering hot from the sun. "Hello," she called out. A pause. Then, "Please." It was a child. Maybe more than one. The words barely made it through the canvas, but they shattered something in her chest. "We can't breathe." Eleanor pressed her ear to the side of the wagon. That's when she heard them. 9 voices, crying, begging, choking. 9 children, locked inside, dying under the sun. And she was alone. No one around for miles, no help coming. Her next move would decide if they lived, or if the desert swallowed 9 more names nobody would ever remember. Eleanor Braddock had lived alone for nearly 3 years. Not the kind of alone most folks imagined: an hour of silence, an empty bed, a quiet Sunday. No, this was the kind of alone that crept into your bones. The kind that sat with you at breakfast, watched you do chores, and whispered in your ear at night. It wasn't a choice at first. Then it became one. She hadn't always been that way. Once she'd been the blacksmith's wife, the one with a laugh that could be heard all the way down Main Street. She and James had built their little ranch from nothing. 3 acres of stubborn earth, 2 mules of porch that creaked when you rocked too hard. They were poor, but it was theirs. And then came the fever. It hit fast, cruel. Took James first. Then their son Caleb, just 8 years old, still missing his 2 front teeth. Eleanor held him in her arms as he slipped away, his little body burning and her prayers unanswered. There hadn't been enough doctors. Or maybe there had been too many regrets. After that, the house had felt too big, the world too loud. So she shut it out. Boarded up the windows, locked away. The cradle stopped speaking to neighbors who didn't know what to say to a woman with that kind of grief in her eyes. But grief, it turns out, doesn't starve easy. It feeds on silence, on memories, on everything you try to forget. Still she endured, the way frontier women do. Learned to hunt rabbits, patch roofs, ride into town only when she had to. She spoke little, smiled less, but every day she rose, fed the chickens, split the firewood, kept breathing. Somewhere along the way, folks stopped asking if she was okay. They figured she was strong, stoic, untouchable, but Eleanor knew the truth. She wasn't strong, just still standing. And that day, riding back from town with 2 sacks of flour and a tin of peppermints she didn't need, she felt nothing but the sun on her back and the weight of another day to survive. Until that wagon. Until the sound of a child's voice, raw with thirst, pulled her out of herself. She wasn't ready. Not for this. Not for 9 dying children chained like animals in the middle of nowhere. But as she stood there alone on that empty road, one hand blistering from iron, the other shaking from fear, she realized something strange. Her heart was beating faster than it had in years, not from panic, from purpose, For the first time since burying her family, Eleanor Braddock wanted to fight for something again. She dropped the peppermint tin, stepped back toward the wagon, and braced herself. Because whatever hell waited behind those chains, she was walking into it. Not as a widow, not as a ghost, but as the only hope 9 forgotten souls had left in this world. The chains wouldn't budge. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter around her hands and yanked again. But the iron links just clanked uselessly against the wooden frame. They were thick, cruel things, looped tight and padlocked, like someone had meant them to hold something dangerous. Not children. Never children. She pressed her face to the canvas. Through a slit near the seam, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A small hand, then another. Smudged cheeks, dirt-streaked faces, wide, hollow eyes, 9 of them. She counted quickly. The youngest couldn't have been more than 4. The oldest, a boy near the back, looked barely into his teens. He was trying to shield the younger ones with his body arms, outstretched shoulders, heaving with the effort to breathe. Water? One of the children whispered, barely audible. "We can't breathe," another gasped. "Please," came a girl's voice, trembling like a dying flame. "Please don't leave." Eleanor's knees nearly gave out. "I'm not going anywhere," she said loud enough to be heard inside. "I promise you that." But promises meant little with chains like these. She scanned the wagon again, searching for a rock and axe, anything that might break the lock, when the sound of hoofbeats broke across the silence. Not many, just one. She turned. A rider was approaching from the east, riding casual but fast enough to raise dust. His shirt was clean hat pulled low, and a tin star glinted on his chest. A deputy's badge. Relief rushed through her for a breath. Then something twisted in her gut. He reined in his horse about 20 feet away, eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," he said coolly, "I need you to step away from that wagon. There are children in here." She called back, gesturing. "They're trapped. They can't breathe." He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dirt with a practiced ease. His hand rested just a little too comfortably on the grip of his pistol. "I'm Deputy Jed Rowe," he said. "That wagon's part of an ongoing investigation, evidence in a federal case. I'm gonna have to ask you to back away." His words were even, his smile polite. But something about him felt wrong. Too smooth, too rehearsed. Eleanor didn't move. "There are children in there," she said again, her voice rising. "They're dying." "That's unfortunate," he said, shrugging. "But orders are orders. Can't have civilians interfering with official business." She took a step forward. "If you're law, then do something. Get them out." Rowe's smile disappeared. "That's not your concern," he said flatly. "They need to stay put until my superiors arrive. And you need to ride home. And forget you ever saw this wagon." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a rescue. This was a cover-up. She looked down at the lock again. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear but fury. "Who were you working for?" she demanded. Rowe's eyes narrowed. "You ask a lot of questions for someone alone in the middle of nowhere." "I'm not leaving," she said. "I wasn't asking." In a blur, he stepped forward fast, too fast. His hand went to his holster, not pulling his weapon, but resting on it like a silent threat. "Last chance, ma'am. Step away." Eleanor did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up a rock. "I don't care if you're the governor himself," she snapped. "You take one more step, and I swear to God, I'll drop you where you stand." For a moment, they just stared at each other, dust swirling between them, wagon, groaning softly in the heat, the faint sound of a child crying behind her. Something in Rowe's eyes shifted. He wasn't amused anymore. He looked uncertain, angry, afraid. "You don't know what you're getting into," he muttered. "Maybe not," Eleanor said, voice low and fierce. "But I know right from wrong, and I know what it means to fight for someone who can't fight for themselves." Behind her, one of the children coughed, a dry, brittle sound like leaves in a fire. Roe glanced at the wagon, then back at her. And in that moment, Eleanor saw it clearly. He wasn't a lawman. He was a wolf in uniform, and she was standing between him and his prey, and she wasn't moving. Not for him, not for anyone. Eleanor stood her ground knuckles white around the rock, sweat beading on her brow. Deputy Roe's hand hovered near his weapon. The sun bore down on them both unblinking. The silence was thick as gun oil. Then, crack! A rifle shot split the air sharp as thunder. The bullet hit the dirt inches from Roe's boots, sending dust flying. He jumped back, startled, reaching for his gun, but stopped when a voice rang out from the ridge. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Eleanor turned sharply toward the voice. A man emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, a tall, lean figure in a weathered duster rifle, resting steady in his hands. He looked old, but not fragile. Tough the way oak trees are scarred solid and stubborn. His gray beard was trimmed, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. "I see you're making friends, ma'am," the man said, not taking his eyes off Roe. "Name's Frank Dade." Eleanor blinked. "You're not with him," Frank snorted. "Hell no. I've been tracking that wagon for 2 days." He stepped closer, slowly keeping the rifle trained on Roe's chest. "You," he said. "Back away from the lady, nice and slow." Roe raised his hands, took a careful step back. "This is official law enforcement business. Real lawmen don't let children cook to death in a locked wagon," Frank replied coldly. "Try a different lie." Something flickered in Roe's face, frustration, maybe fear. "You don't know what's going on here." Frank's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "Then explain it to me. Quick, before I assume you're exactly what you look like." Roe didn't answer. Eleanor stepped forward, lowering her rock, but not the fire in her voice. "There are 9 children in there. They're barely breathing." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Did you say 9? "Yes." He blinked hard. For a moment, his tough exterior cracked. "Any of them?" Little girl, blonde hair, blue dress. Eleanor turned to the wagon, rushed to the canvas flap, and peered inside. "Yes," she whispered. "She's near the back. I think she's unconscious." Frank's jaw clenched. His voice dropped to something gravel soft. "Clara." He took one step forward, then another, rifle still aimed at Roe. "She's my granddaughter. Been missing for a week. Took her from school in Red Bluff." Roe's eyes darted between them like a cornered fox. "I don't know anything about that," he muttered. "You'd better hope not," Frank said, "because I've killed for less." Without waiting, Eleanor turned back to the chains. "Help me, please." Frank nodded. "I've got tools in my saddlebag." He tossed a set of old iron cutters to Eleanor, who caught them with shaking hands. She knelt beside the lock and began working feverishly, her hands blistered but focused. Roe didn't move. Frank didn't either. It was a quiet standoff, one filled not with shouting but with something heavier truth being unwrapped. Frank kept talking calm as a man whittling on a porch. "I've been following this wagon from the ridge. It stopped twice, always just long enough for one more kid to disappear. Folks whisper about slavers, traffickers, but most towns pretend not to see. Easier that way." Eleanor gritted her teeth as the cutters bit into the chain. Not anymore. Suddenly, the last link snapped. The chain hit the ground with a metallic thud. She yanked open the wagon flap. The heat that rolled out nearly knocked her back. Inside, the children lay like rags, limp, silent, red-faced from heat. One boy stirred and tried to lift his head. Eleanor climbed inside without hesitation, calling to them, touching their shoulders. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." She lifted the little girl, Clara, into her arms. Her skin was burning up her lips, cracked. Frank's rifle never lowered, but his voice trembled when he called out Clara, the girl's stirred eyes fluttering. "Grandpa." Frank's whole body changed. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "You're safe now, baby," he said. "I've got you." Roe took one small step back. "Don't," Frank warned. But Roe wasn't reaching for his gun. He was listening. Then he said something Eleanor didn't expect. You don't understand. You think this is over. You think this ends with me." Frank's voice was steel. "Then who else is coming?" Roe didn't answer. He just smiled. Far off in the distance, another sound echoed through the canyon. Hoofbeats, multiple, fast, coming straight toward them. Eleanor looked at Frank. He looked at Roe, and the weight of what was coming settled in the space between them. The hoofbeats came faster now, pounding across the desert like war drums. Eleanor shielded her eyes from the sun scanning the distant ridge. A dust cloud was rising behind it. 4. No, 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the glare, galloping hard and fast. Frank didn't speak. He just adjusted his grip on the rifle. Roe, still standing with hands half raised, looked almost smug. "Told you. You should have walked away when you had the chance." Frank didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "How long till they're here?" 2 minutes, Eleanor said, feeling panic rise like bile. Maybe less. She looked around. No trees, no buildings, no cover. The old mine shaft she'd passed earlier was nearly 30 yards north, its entrance dark and sunken into the hillside. She did the math in her head. 9 children, 5 too weak to stand, 2 barely conscious, 1 Clara barely breathing. They wouldn't make it. Frank read her face. "We're not outrunning them." "No," Eleanor said. "But maybe we don't have to." Frank's brow furrowed. She turned to Roe. "You said they're your people." Roe didn't answer. "You're valuable to them," she continued. "A deputy uniform. You know where the drop points are. You know the buyers." Roe smirked. "You think I matter to them?" Eleanor stepped closer, her voice quiet, deadly serious. "They might not care about your life, but they sure as hell don't want you talking to the cavalry." For the first time, Roe's smirk faltered. "That's right," she said. "You're not just trash deputy. You're a liability. That makes you our best bargaining chip." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we use him as leverage?" "It's the only card we've got left." Frank considered this. "And if they don't care, then we're dead either way." The riders crested the ridge. Eleanor didn't wait. She grabbed the length of chain from the ground, yanked Roe forward and looped it around his neck, just tight enough to make him sweat. She pressed the blunt end against his throat. "You're going to tell them we're witnesses. You're handling it?" "They back off?" "You're bluffing," Roe whispered. "You want to bet your life on that?" Frank hauled the nearest child, an unconscious 6-year-old, into his arms. "We need a plan fast." "We load the children back into the wagon," Eleanor said. "Make it look like nothing's changed. We stall until we figure out what to do next." Frank winced. "They'll roast in there, and they'll die out here if bullets start flying." She turned to the children. Thomas, the oldest boy, was already helping 2 younger ones sit up. His face was pale, streaked with sweat, but determined. "You said your name was Thomas," Eleanor asked. He nodded. "Can you carry one of them?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Take the smallest. We might have to run. I'll come back for the rest if it comes to that." Thomas lifted a toddler into his arms. "They're scared." "So am I," Eleanor said, brushing hair from his eyes. "But we don't show it." The riders were close now. She could see their faces, sun-scarred men with rifles slung across their chests. One rode at the front, taller than the others, with a jagged scar across his jaw and a gaze like chipped ice. He pulled his horse to a stop just 20 feet away. "Marcus," the man called, looking directly at Roe. "This doesn't look handled to me." Roe swallowed. Eleanor tightened the chain. "Say it," she hissed. Roe's voice wavered. "Everything's under control. Just a few complications. I'll take care of it." The man's eyes moved slowly across the scene, the wagon. The children, Frank holding his rifle, Eleanor gripping Roe like a tethered dog. "You let civilians get involved?" he said coldly. "One more step," Eleanor said loud enough for all to hear, "and your man here stops breathing." The scarred man chuckled. "Lady, you don't get it. Marcus is expendable. We all are." He raised a hand. The other riders spread out surrounding them like wolves. Eleanor's heart pounded. This was it. The bluff had failed. Frank stepped forward, rifle aimed at the leader. "Whatever you're running, it ends here. The cavalry's close. You won't walk away from this." "The cavalry?" The man laughed again. "You think they'll get here before we end this? Before I take back what's mine." His eyes burned into Eleanor. "Those children represent a great deal of money. And I always collect." Clara whimpered behind her. Eleanor's grip on the chain didn't loosen. Her voice dropped to a whisper only Ro could hear. "You help us, you live. You don't, he kills the children first." Ro stared ahead at the 5 armed riders and made his choice. "There's another way," he rasped. Eleanor looked at him sharply. "Use me to bait them closer." Then Frank picks them off, one at a time. Frank's eyes narrowed. "You offering to help now?" Ro didn't blink. "If I die, it won't be for him. It'll be to stop him." Eleanor stared at the approaching men, her mind racing. A con man turning against his own. A grandmother with nothing left to lose. A boy carrying a child on his back. And 9 lives hanging in the balance. There was no right choice, only the one she could live with. The first shot came not from Frank, but from the boy. Thomas had seen one of the riders dismount, moving toward the wagon with a rope in hand. The look in his eyes, calculated, vicious, sent something cold down the boy's spine. Without thinking, Thomas grabbed Frank's spare revolver from the wagon, raised it with both trembling hands, and fired. The bullet missed. But the sound, it changed everything. The fragile standoff shattered like glass under boot. Suddenly, the riders drew their weapons. The scarred man barked a curse and kicked his horse forward. One of his men went down hard as Frank's rifle cracked once then again. "Down," Frank shouted. "Eleanor, get them flat." Bullets tore through the air, whistling past wagon wheels and kicking up dirt in thick clouds. Eleanor dove over the children, shielding Clara and the toddler Thomas had tried to carry. Her shoulders slammed into the wagon's side, pain shooting through her ribs. Behind her, Ro had hit the ground chain still around his neck, but no longer resisting. The riders fanned out, circling like predators. Eleanor heard one of them call out, "Flank the old man," and then the crack of another rifle. Frank moved like a man with nothing to lose. Calm, deliberate. He dropped another rider with a shot to the thigh, forcing him to crawl for cover, but they were losing ground. "We can't hold them," Eleanor shouted. Frank reloaded with shaky hands. "Then we buy time. For what, the cavalry's still 10 minutes out. I only need 5. Eleanor turned, saw Thomas crawling to the unconscious girl he'd promised not to leave. His eyes were full of something deeper than fear, grief. Desperation. That boy had already buried too much. "Thomas," she said, crawling toward him, "I need you to take the little ones and run for the mine shaft." "They won't make it," he whispered. "They're too weak." "Then carry who you can. And the rest?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "We come back." It was a lie. They both knew it. Frank raised his rifle again. Another blast, another man down. But Kellerman, she knew his name. Now the scarred one wasn't retreating. He was circling. Clever. Cruel. Looking for his chance. And then he took it. One moment, Eleanor was reaching for another child, the next Kellerman had her. One arm yanked her back, the barrel of a pistol pressed to her throat. "Drop it," he screamed. "You drop that rifle or she dies." Frank froze, blood on his hands, eyes wild. "Don't you dare," Eleanor breathed. But Frank hesitated, and that was enough. Kellerman tightened his grip, dragging her back toward the wagon. "These kids were mine," he hissed. "You think you saved them. You bought them a few minutes, that's all. And now you're going to watch them die. Starting with the blonde." No, Eleanor struggled, kicked, elbowed, but his grip was iron. Then, behind you, said a voice. Calm, steady. Not Frank, not Ro. A new voice. Kellerman turned, and his face went white. Over the ridge, a line of riders had appeared, 20 strong. Blue uniforms, U.S. cavalry, their rifles raised in unison. "You are surrounded," a captain called out. "Release the woman and surrender." Kellerman laughed, high bitter. "You think I'm afraid to die? I've already lost everything." Eleanor felt his finger tense on the trigger, but then Roe moved. With a desperate lunge, the disgraced deputy tackled Kellerman from behind, knocking the weapon aside. The gun went off, missing Eleanor by inches. She fell hard as both men crashed into the dust. Frank didn't wait. His final bullet found its mark straight through Kellerman's shoulder. The man screamed and collapsed. Soldiers stormed down the hill, sweeping in like thunder. The remaining riders scattered, some throwing down weapons, others caught mid-flight. 2 were tackled by soldiers before they got far, and just like that, it was over. Eleanor lay in the dirt, her breath ragged, the children sobbing quietly around her. Thomas crawled to her side, arms wrapped around the youngest. We made it. Frank approached, his rifle lowered. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, but his voice was steady. So did Clara. She stirred in his arms, her tiny hands clutching his coat. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. The captain knelt beside Eleanor. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, blinking back tears. "Just not used to breathing again." He nodded. "We've been tracking these men for weeks. Missing children from 4 counties. Thank God you held them." She didn't feel like a hero, just a woman who'd finally had enough. As the sun dipped behind the canyon ridge, casting long shadows across the blood-stained ground, Eleanor looked at the faces around her, tired, trembling, alive. And for the first time in years, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, not for survival, but for purpose. 6 days had passed since the blood dried in the dust. The army wagons had taken the children back toward civilization, each one now tied to a name of family, a place where someone had once whispered their name in prayer. All except one. Thomas stood beside the porch of Eleanor's ranch, awkward in clothes a size too big, watching her hammer a loose fence post back into place. The sun was setting behind them, washing the land in gold. He still hadn't asked why she took him in, why she didn't send him back with the rest. Eleanor knew the question lived just behind his eyes, so she answered before he had to ask. "You were the first to stand when no one else could," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "That kind of courage, you don't teach that. It's just there." Thomas looked down, kicking at a pebble. "The orphanage won't want me back anyway. I was too old. They said so." "Then it's settled," she said simply. "This place needs mending, and so do I." He looked up hesitant. "You sure?" "I'm sure." They didn't hug, didn't cry, just nodded, 2 survivors making a quiet agreement with the land and each other. Months passed. Spring brought wildflowers to the edges of Eleanor's porch and laughter to rooms long silent. Thomas gained weight, grew taller, started calling her ma'am with less formality and more warmth. Frank and little Clara visited every Sunday, Clara now skipping instead of limping, calling Eleanor Auntie Nell like she'd been doing it her whole life. And sometimes, when dusk settled and the chickens had been fed, Eleanor would sit on the porch with a mug of coffee and watch Thomas reading by lantern light, his lips quietly forming the words she had taught him. The house no longer felt too big. It felt just right. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with lightning or thunder. Sometimes it rides in quiet on the back of a broken boy with too much heart, and a woman who had lost everything until she chose to give again, and in the act of saving a life, she had saved her own. If this story stirred something in you, not just because of the bullets or the bravery, but because deep down you believe in second chances, then maybe you belong here too. Subscribe to Healing Wild West Stories for more tales where love is louder than loss and kindness wins in the end. Always.